Hey everyone, Jakinto here. Today I'll be going over the Blood Death Knight's ability, Death Strike. I'll be going over what the ability does, synergies that other abilities and powers have with Death Strike, common misuses of Death Strike, and how you can optimize using Death Strike in your own gameplay. Death Strike is really the Blood Death Knight's main ability for the spec. It will deal a lot of damage for AoE and single target situations, as well as account for the vast majority of your healing. Let's go into what the ability actually does. So Death Strike is an ability that deals large amounts of single target damage. At baseline, without any modifiers, it will heal you for 25% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds, or for 7% of your maximum health, whichever heal will be greater. Using Death Strike does cost 45 runic power to use, and you do have to be in melee range in order to use this ability. Proper use of your Death Strikes can really make or break the Blood Death Knight spec. So that's what the ability does. So let's get into what other abilities and powers synergize well with Death Strike. For these synergies, we're looking at abilities and powers that directly buff Death Strike or change its effect in some way. So first up, we have Ossuary. As long as we have 5 or more stacks of Bone Shield, our Death Strike's cost is reduced by 5 runic power. This makes the cost of Death Strike go down from 45 runic power to 40 runic power. Now this 5 runic power cost may not seem like a big decrease, but if you're at exactly 40 runic power and you don't have those 5 Bone Shield stacks, it means you have to use another rune in order to generate more runic power to use a Death Strike. Using this extra rune and this extra global cooldown could be life or death, as you could potentially die if you needed that Death Strike at that very instant. So it's very important for Death Strike synergy with Ossuary that you stay over 5 stacks of Bone Shield at all times. The next synergy that we have with Death Strike is the Blood Death Knight's Mastery, Blood Shield. Now with Blood Shield, each time you heal yourself with Death Strike, you gain a physical damage absorption shield, which is based on how much mastery that you have. I have 40.9% mastery, so the absorb shield will be 40.9% of the amount that I healed myself for. Now if you're at low health when you use Death Strike, this can definitely be a large absorption shield. It's very important to note that this shield only goes off the amount healed, so any overhealing that you did to yourself with Death Strike will not go towards this shield. So this really incentivizes you to use Death Strike when you have the lowest amount of health possible, as you want to build the biggest shield you can. So when you're using your Death Strikes, always keep your mastery in mind. Vampiric Blood also has a great synergy with Death Strike. Since Vampiric Blood increases your maximum health as well as healing and absorbs, your Death Strike and Blood Shield will be doing more healing and absorbs respectively. You'll also have more health to work with, which will allow you to drop further in health before using Death Strike. And as long as you took a lot of damage right before using Death Strike, this will result in a bigger heal and absorption shield. So when you really need a lot more healing, using Vampiric Blood when you have Death Strikes available to you is a great option. Next up, we have Death Strike's synergy with Dancing Rune Weapon. Now since Dancing Rune Weapon will mimic your abilities, when you use Death Strike while Dancing Rune Weapon is up, your Dancing Rune Weapon will use Death Strike as well. The damage the Rune Weapon deals will be about a quarter of the damage that your original Death Strike will deal. Although you don't want to be spamming Death Strike while Dancing Rune Weapon is up, it is important to note this damage increase. Next up, we'll look at the talents that synergize well with our Death Strike. First talent we'll look at is Hemostasis. Each enemy hit by your Blood Boil gives you a stack of Hemostasis, which increases the damage and healing of your next Death Strike by 8%, and this stacks up to 5 times. At 5 stacks, this is 40% increased healing and damage to your next Death Strike, which is a large amount. So with the Hemostasis talent, you really want to keep these stacks in mind. As an example, with the Hemostasis talent, if I use Blood Boil on these 2 enemies, I do gain 2 stacks of Hemostasis at the top here. To optimize Hemostasis usage, we want to make sure not to overcap on stacks. So we want to use a Death Strike before we're going to go above 5 stacks of Hemostasis. In large packs of 3 or more, this means using 1 Blood Boil followed by 1 Death Strike. In single target or situations where you only have 2 enemies, you are able to use multiple Blood Boils before using a Death Strike, but make sure you don't overcap on those stacks. So always remember to use that combo of Blood Boil followed by a Death Strike to net you a large amount of extra damage and healing. Next talent synergy that we have with Death Strike is Voracious. Now, Voracious increases the healing of your Death Strikes by 20%. Using a Death Strike also gives you the buff of Voracious, which will increase your leech by 15% for 8 seconds. So baseline right now, Death Strike heals us for 25% of the damage taken over 5 seconds, or 7% of our maximum health. If I choose the Voracious talent, this healing will go up. So now we see Death Strike heals us for 30% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds, and 10.5% of our maximum health at minimum. Now this is really a large increase to our Death Strike healing, which is great. We also want to keep in mind the buff that Voracious gives us. So if we Death Strike on an enemy, we do get this Voracious buff, which increases our leech by 15% for 8 seconds there. So if we can keep that up as much as possible, that would be great. This also allows us to save our DPS bursts for when we have this buff to increase our healing further. The final talent that synergizes with Deathstrike is Red Thirst. For every 10 runic power you use, the cooldown of your vampiric blood is decreased by 1.5 seconds. Since Deathstrike is our main runic power spender, every time we use a Deathstrike, it'll decrease the cooldown time of our vampiric blood. Now, since we'll be Deathstriking primarily when Ossuary is active, every Deathstrike we use will be 6 seconds off of vampiric blood cooldown. This will usually allow you to decrease the cooldown of vampiric blood by about 30 to 40 seconds, which is a large amount. It will really increase the uptime of vampiric blood by a ton. Next up, we'll look at the legendary powers that synergize well with Deathstrike. And first on this list, we have Brindair's Might. So this legendary allows Deathstrike to refund 15% of the runic power spent as long as you heal yourself for more than 10% of your maximum health. With a 40 runic power Deathstrike with Ossuary active, this means that you'll regain 6 runic power every time you Deathstrike and you heal yourself for more than 10% of your maximum health. This can almost always be achieved when you're actively tanking, as you'll be able to heal yourself for more than that amount almost every time. Using this legendary really incentivizes you even more to drop lower on health, just so you're able to get this refund more often. It is important to note that without Voracious, the minimum healing of Deathstrike will not be enough to get you this runic power refund. This is because the minimum healing of Deathstrike will be at 7% of your max health. But with Voracious, the minimum healing will be 10.5% of your max health. So as long as you're missing that amount of health, you'll get the runic power refund. The final legendary power synergy I'll be going over is with Death Certainty. Death Certainty increases the damage dealt by Deathstrike by 35%, and it also allows Deathstrike to reduce the cooldown of your Death and Decay by 2 seconds. This is definitely a large increase to your Deathstrike's damage, and it'll also allow you to almost always have 100% uptime on your Death and Decay if you wish. Although it seems to have pretty decent synergy with Deathstrike, there are other legendaries that'll net you more damage output in the end, such as Super Strain. So while this is not really a commonly used legendary for the Blood Death Knight, it's still worth noting. The final Deathstrike synergy I'll be going over is with the Death Knight's Runeforge of Rune of Sanguination. With this rune, Deathstrike's damage is increased due on the amount of missing health that your target has. This makes Deathstrike have kind of an execute ability to it. Now while Rune of Sanguination is not very popular due to Rune of Fallen Crusader being so good, it's still worth noting its synergies with Deathstrike. You could also have 2 weapons, one with Fallen Crusader, one with Sanguination, and swapping off to Sanguination when your target gets low. Again, it's generally best just to stick with Fallen Crusader, but it's something neat you could do. Now I'll be going over all the common misuses of Deathstrike. The first misuse is using Deathstrike when you don't have Ossuary active. Now sometimes you might have to do this to live, but as long as you're keeping on top of your bone shields, you should be able to use it with Ossuary active almost every single time. If you're able to live while using another Mirror End and waiting a second for your Deathstrike, you should do that instead. If you don't, you're essentially wasting 5 runic power. Again, it can be a bit of a judgment call if you're low in health and you don't have Ossuary anymore, but just make sure Ossuary is up. We don't want to be wasting any runic power as it's very valuable to us. The second misuse that I see is people spamming Deathstrike as soon as they have the runic power to do so. Ideally, you'd want to be pulling up your runic power until you need that Deathstrike healing. If you're about to cap on runic power, you can use a Deathstrike to avoid overcapping, even though if you don't necessarily need all of that healing yet. But if you're not going to overcap on runic power, you should save that runic power until you need a Deathstrike heal. So you definitely should not use Deathstrike right when you have 40 runic power. You want to save that up until you need the heal, until you're missing health, and then use it to heal yourself up. This leads into the third misuse of Deathstrike, which is using Deathstrike at maximum health. Now again, if you know you're going to runic power cap, it is okay to use it at maximum health. But if you're not at any risk of runic power capping, you really should not use it at maximum health at all. If you use it at max health, you're only getting the damage from it. You're not getting any blood shield because you didn't heal any health up, and you're not getting any healing from Deathstrike because you're already at max health. The fourth misuse of Deathstrike is using Deathstrike right when you took a little bit of damage. Now yes, Deathstrike should be used when you took some damage, but you want to make sure you took sufficient amounts of damage in order to use your Deathstrike, especially if you're low on runic power. For example, if you just took a hit that was 10% of your maximum health, I wouldn't use a Deathstrike yet. You want to wait until you get lower health until you use your Deathstrike. Remember that you do have a healer. All of your healing is not reliant solely on you. Let your healer heal you up for the low amounts of health that you're missing, and use your Deathstrikes to heal you for the large amount of health that you're missing. So those are the most common misuses of Deathstrike that I usually see. So now let's go over how we can use our Deathstrikes optimally. So optimally, we want to be over 5 stacks of Bone Shield so we have Ossuary active. We want to be well below maximum health so we get the full effect of Deathstrike's healing as well as some blood shield from it. We also want to avoid runic power capping so we don't waste any runic power. So the goal of using Death Strike is to always proc the 30% of all damage taken in the 5 seconds part of Death Strike's healing. This will net us the most amount of healing from our Death Strikes. Now what does that mean? That means we want to use Death Strike right after we've taken a large hit. After we've taken a large hit is when we'd be at the lowest amount of health. We'll also be receiving healing for damage taken in the previous 5 seconds as well. So let's see what this looks like in action. So we're going to look at this 15 necrotic wake that I completed a while ago here. So as you can see, we're going into this 3-pack pull with a Marauder, Sorcerer, and Bone Mender with 4 stacks of Bone Shield left. So we're first going to prioritize getting those Bone Shield stacks up. We'd first pop a Dancing Rune weapon, and then use a Marrow Rend to get our Bone Shield stacks above 5, and now we have Ossuary active. From here, I really want you to look at my runic power, which is the blue bar with a number on it, and my health, which is the red bar with the numbers on it there. This will give you a sense of when I use and hold Death Strike, as we don't want to use it right away. So as you can see right now, I have 63 runic power. I'm able to use the Death Strike if I want to. Let's see how this plays out here. So I am taking a bit of damage here. As you can see, I did use a Death Strike to heal up. I knew I had another Death Strike saved, as after that one Death Strike was used, I was still at 47 runic power, so I could have Death Striked again. Right now, I am sitting around 50% health, but I wasn't very worried that I'd be killed by anything, as a cleave just happened. The big hit just happened here. So I will let my healer heal me up for a bit while I generate more runic power to accrue another Death Strike. When I have 2 or more Death Strikes saved, that's when I really feel safe. So we're going to gain a bit more runic power and let ourselves drop a bit more before using that Death Strike here. And as you can see, that's when we used it. So we did get healed up by our healer a bit, but we used our Death Strike to heal us for about 30 to 40% of our overall health. And from here, we're just going to use our Death Strikes when we drop low or when we really feel safe that we don't really need to use our Death Strikes here. So there, I used it when I was in max health because our druids used Treants. They weren't attacking me anymore. I don't need my Death Strikes currently for a little while here. So now we're just going to keep this playing. As you can see, I'm getting that runic power up. I'm Death Striking mainly when I have 1 more Death Strike saved up. So if I can Death Strike and I can stay above 40 runic power, then that's great. I still have 1 more for safety. From here, just gaining runic power, using Death Strikes when I'm about to runic power cap here. And we'll see the ads are going back on me now. Drop low here, that's when I use that big Death Strike that heals me up for a ton. And if you see my healing in the bottom right, I'm doing a lot of healing. I'm pretty self-sufficient at this point here. And we're just going to continue with this. Whenever we drop low, we'll use that Death Strike, but we'll save the Death Strikes for when we drop very low here. So I hope this helps you see how we can optimally use our Death Strikes. We don't want to use them right when we're at 40 runic power unless we really need to. Ideally, we build up to 80 plus runic power, so we're able to use 1 Death Strike and still have 1 left over if we need to use it. We also don't want to use Death Strikes at max health unless we're going to overcap on our runic power, or if the targets aren't attacking us and we know we won't need those Death Strikes for a while. Along with all this, do keep your synergies in mind. For example, when you're running Brindare's Might, keep in mind that you'll be getting 6 runic power back every time you heal yourself for more than 10% of your maximum health. And always remember to play around your Death Strikes with your hemostasis stacks from your Blood Boil as well, as that'll net you a ton of extra damage and healing. And that's all I have to say for now about Death Strike. It's definitely your main ability as a Blood Death Knight, and it can really make or break your spec. Optimal usage of Death Strike can really rise you up into the top ranks of Mythic Plus and rating. Being patient with your Death Strikes is very key, which can be hard at first, but as you get used to it, it'll really net you a lot more healing in the end. And since Death Knights are so squishy and spiky, we do need to make sure we are using our Death Strikes optimally in order to perform up to the level of other tanks. Well, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really appreciate the support. Please like the video and subscribe if this helped you in some way, and I'll see you in the next one.